Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of TEPSA Presents. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership here at the Texas Elementary Principals and Supervisors Association. We are thrilled to bring you these variety of conversations, and this week we are talking all about setting goals with someone that we had recently at our Grow Leadership Conference who blew the attendees away. So I knew we had to have her on a TEPSA Presents, and that is Molly Garcia from FranklinCovey. Molly, thank you so much for being here. So I guess the best way to start is tell us a little bit about yourself.
You got it. Well, first of all, it's an honor to be with you all today. So thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure. My journey in just education started, it's hard to believe, about 20, almost well over 20 years ago. It's hard to believe that, right? You blink and life happens. I entered in the space of education doing my dream job, which was being a bilingual teacher in an elementary school setting. Loved it. I was living the dream. And I had a principal who was just a great mentor in my life that came to me and said, "Hey, you know what, Molly, we've noticed the way that you're building relationships with students. Would you consider teaching middle school?" And Todd, I was like, no, they're taller, they're funnier, they dress better. Like there's no way that I'm going to be teaching middle school. However, I leaned into courage because she was a great mentor and I trusted her and became a middle school teacher and spent a lot of my teaching career in that space. And that pattern continued with great mentors in my life and became an instructional coach, an assistant principal, and a building leader of my own school. And in that capacity at the same time, I was also a college instructor where I got to lead aspiring principals through teacher evaluation and school culture. And that led me to the work that I'm doing now, which is a coaching consultant for FranklinCovey Education, getting to work along great educators and leaders such as yourself in the journey of just being better for our students. And then as you, I am a podcast host for the Empowering Teacher, which is a podcast that is truly built for educators by educators with those practical and tactical strategies that they can turn around and use tomorrow in their classroom.
Yeah. I love it. You have so many great experiences in your career. And obviously, you know, we always talk about on these conversations, like, how did you decide you knew that it was time to try something different? And so I'd love to know, like, when you decided to make that jump from a campus to FranklinCovey Education, what was kind of like that guiding principle for you that you were like, I think I'm ready to try something new?
That is a beautiful question. And I don't know that I have like these key, like just this is it. I think what happens is we surround ourselves with true leadership, and we define leadership as seeing the worth and potential so clearly in someone, even when they don't see it in themselves. And I've been very fortunate to have those leaders around me. And so I don't know, Todd, that it was necessarily myself who saw it as much as it was someone around me that said, "Hey, this is your calling, this is your genius area." And that's kind of that tipping point that brought me into the work with FranklinCovey. And I feel so honored to do, because to be quite honest, I never thought I would ever leave my building. You know, I mean, being a principal is, I always tell people, it's the toughest job you'll ever love, because you know, blood, sweat, and tears go into that community and its family.
Yeah.
So, but it's those around you that can see it and then just give you a little bit of a a little bit of a nudge, right?
Well, you know, I think you bring up such a good point. You know, we often tell kids to be careful who you surround yourself with and how they impact and change you. And the reality is that never goes away. And so I think that is a really good testament to your story of you always surrounding yourself with people who aren't afraid to push you or aren't afraid to see strengths in you that you might not see yet yourself. And that's always a sign of a good leader, to find those kind of people and surround themselves with. But you know, we're talking about goal setting tonight, and that's our topic of conversation. And so when was it in your life or career or point that you really felt like, oh my gosh, like goal setting is like a big part or something I want to dive more into or talk about? When did that become important to you?
Yeah, that's such a great question. You know, I mean, if I'm the first person in my family to graduate from high school and then first one to graduate from college. And so I think that goal setting. I know goal setting was always a part of that, right? That's the result that we're getting. I just think I was unconsciously competent, Todd. Like I felt like it was happening. I don't know that I necessarily labeled it that, but obviously I had targets in my life.
Yeah.
And certainly as a teacher, I mean, you are so geared and focused on the success of your students that you're setting constant targets for them so that they can see that you got this, you can do this, you were meant for this. All of that, I definitely saw the power of setting goals. I think where I truly saw both power and empowerment with goals is as a building leader, because what I noticed is when we strategically cascaded our goals, right? So we looked at our district, wildly important goals, how that was aligned to us as a school. And then as a school, being able to take your data from your state assessment, align it directly to, okay, so then what does that look like for our grade levels? Because fifth grade is going to look different than, third grade. And then what does that look like within the grade level? What does that look like for classrooms? And then what does that look like for the individual student? And what happened is all of a sudden our arrows were all pointed in the same direction. And when we were that specific and that intentional and that focused, goodness gracious, the power of that of goals, but the empowerment that it brought for student ownership, that it brought for our team ownership was exponential. And I think that's where I truly saw like the power that we bring when we're intentional with setting goals.
I love that. And I love how you talk about how the goals of others also affect our goals. But, so I have to ask though, because you made a really great point about how in so many of our lives and careers, and we're always setting goals, even when we don't call it setting goals. We have these benchmarks, we have these things we want to achieve. But there are a lot of things that we dream or that we are shooting for that we don't achieve. And we kind of feel like, oh my gosh, like, am I doing something wrong? I'm never getting there. And so what kind of advice would you have for those who maybe set goals and feel like I'm good at setting them, I'm just not good at achieving them?
I love this question. I think everyone listening and certainly here in the space together with you, we're all familiar with a SMART goal. Like we get that. Like that is not new in education. We've been setting goals for a very long time. I think what happens is we get so hung up in just that space that we forget to recognize that we're really not in the business of just setting goals. We're in the business of crushing goals. We're in the business of achieving goals with excellence. And so oftentimes it's not that it's right or wrong. What happens is we might be missing something. And I always lean into the 4 disciplines of execution, which really is a process where we say, okay, what is the one goal? Like, what is the wildly important thing that we know, whether it's in our own personal life or with our students or as a team or as a school system, that if we go after this one thing, this 1 to 2 things that are in our scope, it would give us huge leverage. And understanding, here's where I am now, clarity, here's where we need to go, and here's when we need to get there. So in other words, our starting line, our finish line, our deadline, when we're clear on that, that's that SMART goal aspect, right? But when we have that clarity, then we could actually start to look at, well, what do we need to specifically do to reach that goal? That's predictive. In other words, I know that if I do this thing, I will reach my goal, and it's influenceable. It doesn't depend on anybody else, right? It's something that we have the power to do. And here's the key to it. If you notice, I didn't say 10 things.
Yeah.
What is the 1 to 2 things that we were going to do collectively to reach that goal? So I think part of that is when we don't achieve something is were we really clear on where we're going, right? So I may know where I am now and I know where I want to go, but if I don't have a deadline, Todd, that's going to be the forever goal.
Yep.
Or if, the opposite, I don't really know what my starting point is. I know here's a target and I have to have it by the end of the year, but I don't know where I'm at. We're not going to reach it. So that oftentimes can be a space where we get tripped up, or we have a long list of action steps that, gosh, you know what, 10 or 20, they're not going to happen.
Yep.
At 1 to 2, we can go for it. And the other 2 pieces are we tracking and scoreboarding our progress so that we could visually see, are we winning or are we losing? Where are we at in play? It's like that game on switch that makes it, building off of that momentum that we have it. And then ultimately, are we able to have consistent conversations with an accountability partner around what results are we getting, right? And I feel like sometimes in education, the word accountability is a bad word, right?
Right.
Yeah, accountability just means reflecting on results. So
Right.
are we getting those results? So I always go back to when we're missing something or the target's off, it's usually one of those spaces that we just need to tighten up or get really clear around. Because I'm going to tell you, I've never, ever in almost 30 years in education met a lazy educator. Never, 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 never. What I have met is we're missing the target
Right.
or we have something misaligned, right? And we're working like triple hard and we're not getting the result we want. So it just might be one of those small pieces that we just need to tighten and get clarity around.
Well, I love that advice so much. And I think, in listening to you, as educators, I think so much of that is stuff that we already know. But you did hit one piece in there that I think is one that we often leave out of our goal setting. And that was the accountability person.
Yeah.
And that person who is not just going to be like, you can do it, but will like
Right.
hold you accountable to what were we supposed to have done by then?
That's
What are you doing to work towards that? What are you going to do now that that messed up? Like, I think that's such an important piece that we don't often think about. I'm speaking for myself. I don't remember that piece sometimes. It's like, oh, I need that person because if not, I'll make excuses if I don't have somebody holding me accountable.
bingo. That's it. Because we're so forgiving of ourselves, right?
Mhm. Yep.
We'll let it
Yep.
happen. And the same thing with our students. I mean, we want to model for them. We want them to be able to have data chats. We talk about that all the time in the classroom, that having a data chat of having them have clarity around the goals and steps they're going to take and how to visually see it. But that they're comfortable having a conversation, yes, with the teacher, yes, with the principal,
Mhm.
but also with other students around, hey, this is what I'm going after.
Right.
This is what I'm doing. And did I do those things? And if I didn't, what do I need to do to course correct?
Right.
Right. So just that cadence of accountability, if that's not in place,
Mhm.
it's going to be like driving a car with one
Yeah.
flat tire. I mean, you'll go somewhere, but extremely slow and painful, right?
I love that analogy. You'll get somewhere, it just won't be very pretty.
Yeah, that's
Well,
right.
we talk. I asked about the whole, what do we do when we're not achieving them? But I have found that in some conversations I have with people and with educators specifically, is there's such a feeling of, okay, I'm so overwhelmed, or I see all of the end goals that everybody wants from me, but I don't even know where to start. Like,
Yeah.
I don't even know how to get the ball rolling because it just feels too much.
Yeah.
So I know you kind of mentioned earlier, when setting those goals, having those one or two things, but what other advice would you have people who just don't even know where to begin with setting a goal?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, my first comment is start, right?
Yeah.
Just to lean into it, right? Let's roll up our sleeves and lean into it. But sometimes we overcomplicate everything. So I would say
Mhm.
keep it simple. And what's the one thing, Todd? Like, what is the one thing that if we went after? So if we're looking at like on it from an academic lens, right? So what is the one leverage piece that we know if we go after this one thing,
Mhm.
that it's going to move us forward in
Right.
our own personal lives or in our professional, looking at our own professional development as educators. What is the one thing that if I improved on, that would make my instructional practices so much stronger? Or in my own personal life, what is the one thing that I know that I want to get better on? Because it's contagious.
Right.
But if we have a list of a whole bunch of things and we overcomplicate it, it's just not going to happen because we're tired and we're
Mhm.
busy and we've got a lot going on. And again, it is contagious. So start with the one thing and keep it simple. Do not overcomplicate it. We love to do that.
Well, and that's so funny because as educators, like you said, we are such hard workers and we are so exhausted from all the work and we still overcomplicate
Yeah.
things that add even more work on.
Yeah. And Todd, we do it from a really good place. We do it
Mhm.
because we want it so bad for
Yep.
students. Like that's it. Like we feel so strongly that they deserve the very best that we jump all in and get
Yep.
overwhelmed. And so
Yeah.
just reminding ourselves that give yourself permission, choose the one thing, go after it consistently, and do not make it complicated. Let's keep it simple.
I love it. Well, as we wrap up this conversation, we've talked a lot about us setting those goals and having those things in place. But I'd love to know from an educator standpoint, how do we help our students or even colleagues set attainable
Yeah.
goals? Because I've found, especially being in elementary education, setting the goals for kids is not hard. It's getting them to set attainable goals that can be the frustrating part.
I love it. So I always have a mental tattoo in my mind when I'm thinking when we work with our students. And a lot of it has to do with what we know about the brain, like clarity,
Mhm.
purpose, and why. So I always think of the four words: clarity, leads to ownership, right? That student ownership.
Yeah.
Owner, when we can own something, when a student knows exactly what it is that is expected of them, that they can do it, then it builds momentum. And when we have momentum, kids will have momentum until they don't, until it's no longer fun and exciting anymore. And so if we don't have a system or a structure in place, the momentum will die out along with the attainable goal. So I would say the first thing to help students with the attainable goal is let's make sure that they understand the purpose, the why. What's the why? Why is it wildly important? And how is it going to impact them when they reach this goal, right? So that visioning through it, helping them understand, here's where I am, here's where I want to be, and by here's when I'm going to get there. So even being able to talk about, okay, if you're at, a 47% and you want to get to 97 in 30 days, let's talk about that. Is that really possible, right?
Right.
But having
Right.
them set so those realistic goals and then letting them see it. That's that ownership piece. They're engaged in the process, which builds excitement and momentum. But let's give them a system. And our system we use with FranklinCovey is the 4 disciplines of execution. It's
Mhm.
proven it works. It's simple in nature, and bringing that as a tool to students will help them work through that process. And more importantly, that they feel they own it and they're engaged in it and they're excited about it when they celebrate it.
Okay, so there were so many good things in today's conversation with goal setting, whether it's keeping it simple, whether it's making sure that we have these easily attainable pieces, whether we're taking ownership of it, like all these great things. I'm definitely going to be re-listening to this conversation. But as we close it out, Molly, I always love to ask people, we're going to leave them with one thing here at the end. Sometimes the only thing people hear is what they hear at the end. So if you're going to leave people with one final thing, what's the one thing you hope they take away from this conversation?
Yeah, that they can. I mean, I always think about, at the end of our podcast, we have a closing line that says, keep shining, you've got this. I mean, our educators are the number one indicator of student success. You got this. You can do it. Keep it simple. We believe in you. Uh, our kids are who they are and are striving for the things they do because of our educators. So absolutely, I'm hoping keep shining. You've got this.
I love it. Well, Molly, I have so enjoyed this conversation. Your session at Grow was incredible.
Love you.
So I'm excited to learn more from you, but thank you so much for making time for us today. Thank you, everybody, for listening to another one of our TEPSA Presents episodes, and we hope to see all of you online.